Hello Sofa Squad. Today we're going to be reviewing another interview that came out very recently. This was an exclusive with KGET 17 and Perla Shaheen is the one who hosted the interview. The interview is with the chief of police. Now this is in relation to the case with the two missing boys, Orrin and Orson West. Now this interview, I'm gonna put a link down in the description below. You can watch the interview in its entirety, but you can also read the transcript in this article that is posted. Now I'll be putting out some screenshots of it as I read through. I want to read through in this video those transcripts so we see exactly what is being said, we hear it, we read it type situation, and then just offer some commentary on it as we go along. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So she asked right off the bat, are the boys alive? Obviously this is a question on everybody's mind. Now this is what the chief of police, John Walker, had to say about that. I have no reason to believe they're not at this time. I've said it through this whole thing. I remain absolutely optimistic that they are alive, and I have to believe that unless I find some sort of proof or evidence that is different. Now before we begin really getting deep into it, I should preface this with this. I do believe that the police know more than they are telling. This is how this goes in every case. You know, they are not going to divulge all the information that they have, and so I'm entering into this with the knowledge, for me at least, of, you know what, they know more than they are going to say right now. So the fact that he's saying, you know what, I believe these boys are alive, you know, I read into that saying, look, we haven't found anything telling us otherwise. Basically exactly what he's saying. You know, it wasn't like we found some kind of, you know, crazy evidence at the house that would lead us to think some horrifying accident had taken place. If you remember back with the Gannon Stout case, when they went to the house, and even though they hadn't recovered him yet at that point, there was evidence in there that was like, something really bad happened and there's proof of it. They are not saying that yet at this point, so we just kind of have to go based on that. The next question she asks is, what could have happened to the boys? What are the possible scenarios of what happened? This is John Walker's response. There's 1,000 different scenarios. Let your imagination run wild. What I do truly believe, that night there's no way they could have got out of that neighborhood without some sort of assistance from an adult. That is my belief. So again, right there, this is what we keep coming back to with this, you know, is the actual matter of how did they leave. You know, some people think they walked off. Some people think, you know, an animal got them. Some people think they were abducted, yada yada. Some people think they were never in the home. Now remember at one point where they're saying dogs weren't picking up on scents, so on and so forth, he keeps coming back to saying he does not believe those boys left that property on their own. Now this is on the assumption that they were actually there to begin with, of course. So there's that. I think reading into that, I mean, if I'm going based on just what he's saying, then that's telling me, okay, he does believe they were there, and he believes that somehow, some way, an adult helped them away, and I shouldn't say helped, an adult assisted this process and these boys leaving the property. So let's keep going and see what else he has to say about that area. Now her next question is, and so in past situations with missing cases, is that usually the case that it's someone familiar that is involved? And Joe Walker says, it's always situationally driven and I can't point fingers. We always start from the inside out. Of course the people closest to them, the people who have seen them last, that's who we always start with. We always look at family first, especially with kids that young. We have to, and from there it branches out from there depending on which way the evidence goes, but we can only work with what we're given. Again, if you follow cases, you see this before where this happens and all the focus goes in on the immediate people, and so that is normal to me, seeing how this goes of, okay, we're investigating all the family, we're questioning them, that's normal. How they react to it is another story. Now he has not been too forthcoming in exact details, and again, they're going to keep some stuff back. That's just what they do in these investigations, and it leaves a lot of room for filling in the spaces, if you will. But he's not going to come right out and say, oh yeah, we think the adoptive parents did it. Oh yeah, we think the biological family did it. Yeah, he's just not going to come out and say that right now and tip his hat off to where the investigation is going. But so far what I'm reading into it, if we go based on what he is saying, I'm just like, yeah, they don't have anything. You know, this investigation is going nowhere, it seems. Now her next question to him is as follows. And earlier, I know in our first interview in front of the house on Aspen Avenue, you said that you suspected foul play. play? Do you still think that? Why or why not? And now here's John's response to that question. An excellent question by her. Absolutely. I personally believe that those kids got out of that neighborhood with some sort of assistance. So if there was an adult that assisted them or took them out of the neighborhood, that would constitute foul play. Now she follows that question up, and I'll tell my 2 cents on that in 1 second, with this question. So exactly what constitutes foul play? It doesn't necessarily mean abuse. John Walker answers, well, foul play means that someone has taken the children and not divulged to their parents where they are at. That's just, we'll start basic 101 right there. Somehow someone had to have done that and has not reported to us. Everyone, I would at least say in the nation, knows we're looking for these kids, has not reported it. That would constitute foul play because the only people those kids are supposed to be with are their parents. Okay, so let's break this down a couple of things. First of all, kudos for defining some of the words that are used. Because again, when I heard foul play, I was like, oh, but they said it was foul play. You know what I mean? Like my mind goes somewhere with that. And so with him defining what he means by that, which is, look, that doesn't mean necessarily something grim, but it means those kids aren't with the parents and that's where they're supposed to be, and somebody helped make that happen and we don't know who, why, when, where, how, whatever. That's foul play. So okay, you know, we've got that covered. Now I'm going to reread this first line right here because I think it's interesting. Well, foul play means that someone has taken the children and not divulged to their parents where they are at. So I think it's interesting that he says that and he says divulge to the parents, because this right here lends me to think 2 things. Number one, he's saying that, okay, they haven't told the parents where they're at, so someone took these children, so they're going down the path of someone outside of family, and I mean adopted, biological, whatever. You know, he's saying parents. So technically, legally, the Trezell and Jacqueline are the parents. So someone outside of them have taken those children and not told the parents where they are at. So that leads me to think, so maybe Jacqueline and Trezell are not on their radar in that capacity. However, I go back and forth with that, and I'll tell you why as we get to some other things. So there's that little bit of information. Now, also on that frame of note, it could also be this right here too. Again, they're going to know things that we don't know, that they don't tell us. Look back historically over cases such as this. You know, the police are going to go with what they know. And earlier he said, you know, we can only work with what we're given. So again, this is allegedly street we're going down, but let's just stay on the road of Jacqueline and Trezell. So if he's saying we can only go based on what they have told us, what grandparents have told us, what whoever, you know, all these people that are getting involved in this, we can only go based on what we're being told. Well, if they're being told, look, someone had to have taken the children out of the backyard literally in split seconds, then that's what we can go based on. And it seems like they disappeared into thin air. Again, something doesn't seem right with that story. So that's where I'm like, there's something murky there that is not being told. I don't think it's necessarily sinister that it's not being told. Let me change that. I hope it's not. I hope that it's because they are withholding information and trying to gather more information and they can't tip their hat in that process. So let's continue with the next set of questions. So she asked, are there any persons of interest right now? I mean, my God. I mean, if she didn't read our minds on that one. Now, John Walker's response is as follows. Oh, there's dozens of persons of interest. We have nobody specific. We have no specific suspects. No one has been charged. We've brought no charges so far. But again, we are continuing the investigation. I know a lot of people believe we've given up. That's not true. We still get leads. We still get clues every day that we follow up on, if they're viable. If someone says, hey, we saw them at the Rite Aid yesterday at 10 o'clock in the morning, am I going to send somebody over there to review the cameras from yesterday at 10 o'clock in the morning? Absolutely, I'm going to. If someone says, well, I think they're near the water somewhere, I can't follow up on that. I need specifics. I need a direction to go. I just can't spin in a circle or have my people spin in a circle looking. If you give me a specific place and a time or a specific person to talk to, we're still doing that. So again, if we're looking at this on superficial level, he's basically just saying, look, there's tons of people who are people of interest. I think there would be by default in a case like this, simply because the boys aren't home. And so who else come into contact with them? Yada, 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 so on and so forth in the past. Of course, anyone could be a person of interest at this point. So I do believe him when he says this, and I think that that's true. Now, his dynamic where he's basically saying, look, we will follow up on leads with specific information. I mean, I can only imagine how many tips they get that are things of this nature. I had a dream and I envisioned the boys near a barn on, a dirt road. I mean, I'm making this up, but something of that nature. And then it turns into this big thing. Oh my gosh, well, there's something like that similar, whatever, you know how this goes. So they can't do much with that. They can't go out and search every body of water, if you will. They can do viable, we saw them at the Rite Aid, like the example he gave. So that's where I do think it's important. And obviously I do think he's sincere in saying, look, if you cite these boys, if you have this, call us, let us know, give us details, and we will go follow up with it. So that part, I'm glad to see that. I too do feel like, wow, I mean, it just feels like we're spinning wheels because, I mean, these cases get cold. When it gets past the initial time of the child missing, I mean, you know how this goes typically. And I think that's what has everybody on the edge of their seat. So she follows up with one more question. And going on that, as you say, you're still working on this investigation. And John Walker says, I have dedicated resources in my department. Bakersfield has dedicated resources from their department. We've got the FBI involved. We've got the Kern County Sheriff involved. We've got the Kern County District Attorney involved. There's still a ton of people working on this. We have not by any means given up. Now, again, they've had this, little bit coming in with all these different departments, all these different people. That, I guess, what I feel like is the part that I'm like, I mean, my goodness, how did these boys vanish into thin air? How do they have all these resources coming at this? I just feel like someone somehow knows something. I mean, obviously this is the case. Somebody, of course, knows something. But it just shocks me with all these resources thrown at this case that they can't get any kind of leeway on it. Now, on that same train of thought, this is the next question that she asked him. Recently was the 2-month anniversary of when the boys went missing. Every time we speak, it seems like the days get longer and the days turn into months. Is it possible that this case will go cold and we'll never know what happened to the boys? Now, John Walker says, and he's very honest about this, of course it's possible. I mean, anything is possible. But go cold, that would mean that we stop looking, or we'd stop looking into clues, and that's not going to happen. We will continue to follow up on any clues. We'll continue until we know something different. So there's a lot of semantics involved here. Cold case, what does that mean really? A cold case is never really cold, it's just not being actively investigated. I've got 8 cold cases here in California City as we speak, and they're all being investigated on a daily basis. So that's a TV term, I think. Again, I'm glad they're kind of defining what their versions of these things are, because when I think cold case, I think of a case that's just like forgotten about, the TV shows that we see of, well, 30 years later, a new person came in and found a fiber of hair, that type thing. So, I mean, if there's a better term for it, I don't know. If you know a better term for it, drop it down there. But obviously, and I mean, we would hope this, he's like, look, we're going to keep doing this as long as we keep getting leads and all this stuff coming in. And I guess that's the part that it has a bunch of us scared, is what happens when that stops happening and the boys still aren't returned home? What then? Now, in regards to the reward money, here's her question and here's his answer. Okay, I know the city is voting tonight, or they're deciding at the city council meeting to renew the reward money for anyone who can find the boys. I know they're planning to do that consistently. They're trying to keep that money for any missing person's case. If we find Orrin and Orson West, they might extend that money to other missing person cases. So it seems that the city and you are still actively trying to pursue the city's 8 missing person cases. Now, this is what he says. No, that's not true. We've only got 2 active missing persons cases. We've got 8 cases that we are still investigating. 6 of those are homicides and 2 of them are missing. Those are all adult cases. So again, a missing adult doesn't necessarily mean it was foul play. Is there a possibility? Sure, but they're adults and they're free to go wherever they want. They don't necessarily have to tell anyone where they're going. So if someone reports the missing, okay, we've got an open missing person investigation that goes into our missing person system. If anybody nationwide comes in contact with that person, then that will immediately pop up in the database. And now, side note, Sofa sidebar in this one, when he talks about, adults are allowed to go missing, this part always gives me chills, because when you see so many of these different cases, and not just this, I mean, obviously with little children, but grown adults, stuff like that, you have to wonder sometimes, like, okay, have people just chosen to disappear and they're allowed to do that? I mean, that would be another gut-wrenching aspect, in addition to just, missing person cases there. I digress. Let's continue. Now, her next question I love. Are you starting to think that this case is part of something larger, something like human trafficking? And he answers, I can't rule that out. I can't rule anything out. Of course it's possible. Anything is possible until we know different. Everything is still in play, so we need specific facts to prove otherwise. She follows up, but your guys are considering all of these viable options. And he says, absolutely. Okay, because this is something that everybody is starting to talk about. Not everybody, but a large amount of people are starting to say, what if this is, this and this bigger thing, and da-da-da-da-da. And so again, I feel like with these answers of his, this is where I go into I hope this is because they are just kind of being transparent on one side, but also they might know other things that they're just not going to put out there quite yet. But I mean, these answers just tell me this is just so ambiguous still that anything is possible. Next up, she asked this. How certain are you that the boys are not in the Aspen Avenue house? I know when you first did the interview, you told us canines smelled the scent of the boys inside the house. They did not smell it leaving the house. It seems that that would imply that they are still there. How certain are you that they are not? Again, excellent question. Now, I would have framed it a little bit differently maybe, and I think she did that in one way because she's probably trying to get him to respond to that, because this is the reason a lot of people feel like the kids were never at the house type situation. Now, the other thing to that of it being like, well, no, they're still in that house somewhere, some way. I know there's some stuff going on around that, I can't speak to that. My train of thought was always that the boys were never at the house. That's the road I went down, and that somehow their scent came from something else, But the fact that the dogs weren't picking it up outside is very interesting. So now let's see what he has to say to that. Excuse me, I have to smile at that. I am 110% certain those boys are not in that house. I've been in there numerous times. We've searched every possible place in that house. I know people believe that there's secret rooms and there's a basement and there's false walls. We've searched every possible nook and cranny in that house multiple times. I am absolutely certain we've searched the backyard multiple times. We've searched underground of the backyard with different technology multiple times with nothing. The dogs aren't always 100% accurate. We've had the dogs in the house that night. They alerted inside the house but did not alert us outside. Doesn't mean anything. We use those as tools that maybe will point us one way or the other. Just like people keep asking about polygraph. Polygraph is not admissible as court. Is it a tool? Sure. Can believe at some point that maybe you are being deceptive by the results of the test. Sure, but it's only a tool to help us go in a certain direction. Right now we don't have any of that, unfortunately. Now we're going to comment on a couple of things with this because I felt like he kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit on this one. And we'll go with our other question. So again, if you think back to some of these other cases with dogs and whatnot and how different dogs are trained to do different things, look at the Christopher McNabb and Courtney Bell case, where hands down we know for a fact the dogs were in the woods very close to where the infant was. One of the dogs was not trained cadaver. One of the dogs was, still didn't. Neither of these dogs picked up on that situation. And there's case after case after case. So this tells me at this point that I'm like, okay, my whole train of thought of, okay, well, the kids were never in the house and because the dogs didn't smell outside. I'm kind of like, I'm coming off that one a little bit. I don't know. Now, do I personally think they're in the house somewhere still? No, I've not thought that. I didn't go down that road. Now, again, let's talk about the cat that got out of the bag on this. So when he says the whole thing about, yes, polygraphs can't be used in court, and this is true. This is like not really good science. I don't even want to call it science anymore, forensic science, whatever you want to call it. But like he said, as a tool just to see. And then when he says we don't have any of that, I'm like, bing, bing, bing. Maybe he just gave us his answer to the question of, did the parents take a polygraph? And she can read our mind, because the next question she asks is, so did the adoptive parents take a polygraph? And he says, I can't comment on that. Now they leave it at that. So again, my 2 cents, my little sofa sidebar here. I think the adoptive parents declined a polygraph. There could be multiple reasons for that, so it's here nor there as to why. But my opinion, and I'd like to hear yours, is that he kind of let it slip a little bit. And obviously, even if they did or whatever, it doesn't matter. He's not going to tell us. Yeah, but all we know is that he is saying they don't have the tools to use as a directional compass to know which way to go in the case. And the tools he's specifically referring to in that response are, you know, the scent that the dogs are doing, and basically that was like a null type situation. That's the way I look at it, as well as a sense of, is someone being deceptive via a polygraph? Now she also goes down other possibilities, and she asks, you know what, is it possible that the boys wandered into the desert that night? You know, she's like, I know you said it's foul play, but you know, is this a possibility? And this is what John Walker had to say about that. If I had to bet my house on it, I would say no. Because we searched thoroughly that night. We brought an airship with infrared and got no hits. We searched that whole desert a week later within a 5-mile perimeter around the house. We found nothing. Doesn't mean they are not there, but I am super confident. I know little kids are really fast, but I know they have no stamina. So they might take off like a shot, but they'll only go about 20 or 30 yards in my experience. I'm saying that can't happen, but I'm super confident that they are not somewhere around. I truly believe they didn't wander off in the desert that night and we haven't found them. Now again, this dynamic here, because that was a huge possibility when you looked at the layout, and you know how there's the big open space next to the area that they would have wandered out into, you know, and then those moments where we see, you know, that they are allegedly saying, we realize the children aren't there, we're doing our thing, we hop in the car. Even if he circled around, like, to say the kids were going off in this direction, whatever, wandering around, one would think and hope that once the cops got there, and the way the cops are shining lights in these open spaces and all this kind of stuff, that is a place where it's like, okay, bam, if the kids were wandering off, because again, there's 2 little boys, so to think 2 little toddlers at that, toddling off, you know, into the night, I mean, I just feel like, but stranger things have happened. But it's also interesting that he is, you know, obviously not 100% saying, no, that didn't happen. He can't say that, you know, but he's super confident as he says that that's not what happened, that they didn't just wander off and they just haven't found them out in the desert. She also follows that up with mentioning the weather that night and how cold it was. And John Walker agrees, and he says, yes, the cold weather definitely would have slowed them down. Now she also asks, explain that infrared technology that you were just talking about, which again, great question. I love this. Because, you know, I want to know. This is what John Walker had to say. Yeah, we basically had a helicopter with what they call a FLIR. It will detect body heat. It's pretty sophisticated. I did have the opportunity in my previous law enforcement career that I got to actually work an airship, and it's basically like a scope that'll go over any territory, any land. It will pick up anything that has body heat, and you know adults are generally 97 Fahrenheit, so it'll pick that up in the dark, and it shows up like a beam basically. Now she follows that up with, it's a helicopter that goes around and detects, searching for body heat. And John Walker continues, it has the ability to do that, yes, along with other things. They also have the night sun. That's what they call the big searchlight, but also they are equipped with that FLIR that will pick up body heat. And then she continues, and that's what was sent out that night that they went missing. And he says, yes, it was deployed that night. Yes, to the best of my knowledge. And she asks, was it one or multiple? I think we had at least one in the air the whole time. A lot of times those helicopters are only equipped to be up there for 2.5 hours. We were out there for a pretty long time, so I would imagine that they probably switched off at some point. So again, the kind of stuff he's talking about now, you know, I've only seen this kind of stuff on TV, but I'm getting an image right now of what I'm thinking. And so if we're going based on what he says, these helicopters were up there there. Da, 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 da. Again, I would hope, I would think, I would pray that they would have picked up the image of these two boys. So that's where, you know, and let's sofa sidebar this for a second. Let's go on based on, okay, so we know that this is what happened. This is what Trezell and Jacqueline are saying took place. We can see some of that video stuff of, okay, yes, here he's doing this. Da, 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 da. So the cops are saying in that moment, those children disappeared. You know, an adult had a hand in getting those children away. Now, we don't know if they toddled off and someone grabbed them off the street or something of this nature, but whoever that was, whatever happened, would have had to have done this so quickly and gotten out of there so fast. Also, you know, look around the neighborhood type situation. I mean, this is where your mind starts going, because it's like, okay, well, if the kids disappeared this quick, it can only be so many things. You know what I'm saying? They can only be so many things. Somebody waiting on them, a neighbor, the adoptive parents involved. I mean, this is where it just keeps coming back to of, it's almost like we can almost confidently say the children did not wander off in the desert. This is all based on the fact of we are riding on the assumption that the kids were at the house, that this is what is going along. They were outside, da, 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 they disappeared into thin air. So there's only a few possibilities of who could have had a hand in that. Now, the next thing that the reporter covers is excellent. I wanted to know details about this. I'm glad they spoke on it. And here's her question. When I first met the biological mother of the two boys, she had mentioned how one of them had a broken femur. This was a couple of years ago. I know I saw it on the Attorney General's website as well. Orrin had a broken femur, the biggest bone in the body, in his leg. Did the bone heal at the point the boys went missing? John Walker says this. Yeah, it had been years prior. I think even prior to them adopting the kids. To the best of my knowledge, that was ruled as an accident. I'm sure there was an investigation done by Children's Services and they found no misconduct. Okay, so again, very interesting in that, because honestly, at first when this was coming out, you know, and you know how the rumor mill goes and everything, and I was like, okay, I'm hearing people saying, well, how could the kid have gotten away? He had a broken leg and da. So I was like, okay, we are getting this from, you know, the police officer, from the chief of police, Mr. John Walker, saying, no, his leg was healed. That was not an issue. So let's continue on with the questions about the biological mother. The reporter straight up asked, okay, so no misconduct on the biological mother's part. And John Walker says, yeah, with anybody. I believe to the best of my knowledge that it was just ruled an accident, that he broke his leg. He fell down somehow and he broke his leg. However, that would be a good way to identify. That's a good identifier. And she follows up, what is the surgery? And he says, no, if we locate a child that has a broken femur that was consistent with the injury sustained by the children, it's another way to ID the kids. Again, she follows up with, but it's not relevant in this situation. And he says, no, it has nothing to do with their disappearance, not that I know of. And she says, but I'm saying is it already healed, so it's not relevant. And he says, right, it was a prior injury. So, I mean, hallelujah on that. I was like, okay, look. Because again, I was like, what? They're claiming a kid with a broken leg, you know, hobbled off into the desert. So there's that. And again, it is, you know, kind of grim to think, but he's like, look, it's a good identifier. You know, here we go. We can use this to identify the child if the said child is found. Now she goes in for some of the hard-hitting questions next. Is it possible that they are with extended family members right now? And have you done anything to pursue that possibility? Questioned extended family members. And John Walker says, we've questioned everyone around them. We start with the immediate family and work our way out. So we've done our best to question anybody and everybody that can possibly be related. But I don't know. It's a pretty big family. If someone had them, I guess that would be great. That they're healthy and alive and we can find them. That would be awesome. Our best case scenario is we find them healthy and we find them alive. Now, I think that's a very interesting answer. You know, and again, he's reiterating, we start from the center. In Jacqueline and Trezell, we work our way out. And he has talked about, you know, we know how the grandparents and these people have been pulled into it and all that type of stuff. I think it's interesting that he says, I don't know, it's a big family. Maybe one of them does have them. You know, okay, I mean, that would open up a whole other can of worms. You know, but I just think it's interesting that he's saying that at this point, and he's also like, you know, again, leaving all these doors open. It just feels odd to me. Now, she will continue on with the next line of questioning. And I remember that, again, referring to that first interview with you, you said none of the neighbors in that area had seen the boys. Again, this was a major aspect here. John Walker says, I think I amended that because we did have some neighbors that said they had never even seen kids. But remember, the West had only been there for 3 months, September to December, when it occurred. We did find some neighbors that had said they had never seen the kids. However, we did find neighbors who confirmed that they did see kids there on the property. Now, she says, so that was later on? And he says, yeah, that was actually shortly after. That's why I've tried to amend that multiple times. Initially, we couldn't find anyone who has seen the kids, but we did actually find other neighbors who had seen kids there. The West family had only been there 3 months. COVID, all these things, cold weather, all that can attribute to that. They had a huge backyard with a fence, and here in California City, you've been to the neighborhood. There's large vacant lots between the properties. Okay, now this is one of those things where I'm like, okay. That still seems very dicey to me. That's just my little personal sofa opinion right there. I think it's very odd that it's still this whole thing of, well, we finally found some neighbors that had seen kids. Now, here's my whole thing too. I'm like, great, fine, dandy that the neighbors have seen kids. Have they seen those 2 boys specifically? That's what I want to know. Have they seen the 2 boys specifically? You know, the fact that one neighbor didn't see them, all that, I mean, I get that. I can look out here where we're at and I'm like, yeah, there's some neighbors that, I mean, again, it's a little bit different. You know, there's acreage out here, that kind of stuff, so someone could easily, yeah, I wouldn't know they had kids. But the neighborhood they're in, I don't care if a lot's vacant. I mean, the houses are on Front Street, you know what I'm saying? So everyone's kind of there. So it's weird to me that some neighbors are like, I've never even seen any kids. You know, this whole thing of, well, look, you know, they had this big backyard and and I'm just kind of like, I mean, don't they come and go? And I mean, I get COVID, but I mean, really? You know, I mean, something just seems weird. But again, I feel like I wish we could hear from a neighbor that is like, and maybe we have, and maybe y'all know about this, and drop it like it's hot in the comments. This says, I have specifically seen those 2 little baby boys at this home at some point in some capacity. Now, the next question she asks is it still true that the adoptive parents are the last people to have seen the kids? And he says, according to the information that we received that night from them, yes. And she says, there's been no one else, no after sightings of the kids ever since? And he says, multiple, and we followed up on all of them, proven to be false. So she says, so the adoptive parents are considered to have been the last people to see the kids. When and where was the last time someone besides them saw Orrin and Orson? Now, this is huge because obviously we know this is stuff about this is all over the place. So this is what he says in relation to that. I believe the grandmother had seen them prior. I don't know the exact dates, but the people that we have spoken to in the neighborhood had seen them other than the parents. Now she says, so that was the relative they visited before. It was like recently before they went missing, correct? And he says, yes. And she says, when did the other children in the family say that they last saw the boys? And he says, I can't comment on any interviews that we've had with the other kids. And they say, but you've interviewed the other 4 kids. And he says, yes. Now, I think all that's very interesting. And some of that does answer a little bit of a question. But again, it's not, I feel like maybe this is my like OCD thing where I want them to be more specific. So the neighbor said they saw the kids there. Are we talking about the boys? Because there's a lot of kids, you know, in and out of here. So that's where I'm like, are we talking about the little boys? So there's that. I do like that he's confirmed, yes, we have talked to the other children. No, I'm not going to tell you what we talked about. So, and I don't expect him to. You know, I wouldn't expect him to at all. I feel like that's information that would come out when it needs to come out, if it needs to come out. Now, she asked, are the West, Trezell and Jacqueline, still cooperating? Have they retained a lawyer? And he says, yes, they're still cooperating. And he says, I don't know if they've retained a lawyer. So I think that's interesting because I feel like he would know because the lawyer would be the one that was like, hey, look, you need to talk to me. She says, okay, so you're still in contact with them. Can I ask when the last time they were interviewed? And he says, formally interviewed, I think it's been several weeks. Now, I think that part is interesting because he says formally interviewed. And that must mean like and again, I don't know, I'm just kind of going off here, a sit down, boom, 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 several weeks ago. So if they have retained lawyers in the meantime, it looks like the cops might not know unless they've been reaching out. Now, it does sound like maybe he's done some reaching out of maybe a quick question, but nothing that he considers formal, come down to the station, that type situation. Now, in regards to the biological family, this line of questioning comes up. She asks, are the members of the birth family cooperating as well? And he says, yes. And she says, and have they retained a lawyer? Not to my knowledge, he answers. And when was the last time you spoke with them or interviewed them? And he says, personally, the last time I spoke with the biological mother, it was a conference call the day after the boys went missing. She says, okay, so it's been quite a while since you last spoke with the biological mother. And he says, I personally, yes. Other people have been in contact with her, but I have not. Now, I think this is very interesting that he is confirming that much and that he is making sure to say, myself, I have not spoken with her outside that day after, but other people have been in contact with her. So that leads me to think two things here. Number one, he spoke to her. He has no reason to be worried other than, I'm sorry that this has happened. And then as these other agencies get involved, they speak to her, but he doesn't feel maybe a need to do so. Now, she continues with her line of questioning. Has anyone been instructed not to speak to the media, like the adoptive parents, biological parents? And he says, not by us, maybe by their attorneys, but not by us. Then she asked this, is there video footage of that shows the boys in California City? I know the neighbor across the street had a doorbell camera. I know the neighbor to the left of the house, if you're facing the house to the left, also had surveillance footage of the home. I know police took that footage and analyzed it. Was there any footage that shows the two boys? And he says in answer to that, I feel like he keeps giving over and over about this. We have hours of footage and I cannot comment on any of those, on any of that. So he says that all the time. Now, I'm sure they do have hours and hours and hours of footage. I mean, they have 3 months worth of footage they probably need to look at, so I get it, Part of me just sits here and thinks these thoughts. I'm like, do you not have somebody that literally their job is to start at minute 0001 second and just watch up until they see their police cars pull up 3 months later from when they move into the house till then? Because I feel like that would give a lot of answers. Now, the fact that he's not mentioning any of that, it makes me feel a couple of ways. Again, I don't expect him to, but number two, I'm also like, very interesting, because let's put it this way. If he were able to say this, oh no, the boys, we see them multiple times on there. I mean, why wouldn't you say that? As opposed to, no, you know what? We've watched like a month's worth of that video and we've never seen those little boys there. I mean, that's sketchy. You know what I'm saying? So it's almost like, which one would you hold back? Now, she continues, I called initially a few months ago. I know other people have called since regarding the initial 911 call for the two boys. From what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, it happened just before 6 p.m., correct? And he says, it happened about 5:45 p.m. Well, let me correct that. The initial call for service came at 5:45. My first officer was on scene within 5 minutes or less. I think within 10 minutes I had 4 officers on scene. And she says, is there a reason why the department won't release the 911 call? I tried to get it and didn't receive it. And he says, no, because it's still part of the investigation. It's an ongoing investigation, so we're not going to release. And she says, I mean, I've received 911 calls from ongoing investigations before. And he just says, we are not going to release it at this time. And she says, okay, so it's because it's an ongoing investigation? That's the main reason? And he says, correct, we're keeping it for now. I think that is very interesting. Now again, I ain't some lawyer. But her bringing that up of, look, I've gotten this from other things, why not this? And him being like, we're not giving it up. I would be very curious to know the tone of voice on that 911 phone call. I would be very curious to know what that was like, if it paints people in a bad light. Now, in regards to evidence that was recovered, she says this. We've talked about the evidence that you've recovered, searches of the home, around the home. You had mentioned that none of it really came out with anything important. Could you mention any of the evidence that has been taken, including forensics? Anything that was relevant or important? And he says, the initial search warrant, we were able to take into custody their electronic devices, phones, computers, clothes, bedding, items from the backyard, items from the house, anything we thought that could possibly be relevant or lead us to a conclusion. And so then she follows up that question with this. So some of the clothes of Orrin and Orson to navigate the scent of them with the dogs and things like that. And he says, and for DNA purposes and all of that. And then she says, those things have helped helped in terms of that analysis, but it hasn't created any leads for finding them. And he confirms, no, not yet. Now, this next part about the phones I find very interesting. She says, you mentioned that you took the phones to the two parents just a day or two after the boys went missing. And he says, actually, it was the next day. And she says, yeah, it was the next day. I remember talking to them and they mentioned the police took our phones. We can't share our contact information. Jacqueline West had mentioned having photos of the boys on her phone that she couldn't share because police had taken her phone. Did you find anything significant on those phones? Did you find any pictures of the boys? And he says, yeah, we found pictures, but nothing else that I can disclose. Now again, she follows up with this. Is there a reason why no more pictures of the boys have been released so far? I guess the police department doesn't have access to these photos? And he says, I no longer have access to those photos. No, those actually were taken by the FBI. And then she continues, but the parents have since gotten the phones back. And he says, I believe they have new phones. Wow, so the FBI just took their phones? I believe they got them back, but yeah, they have new phones. Now again, I don't know how things work. Maybe the FBI kept these phones for a hot minute, and so they went ahead and got new phones, but then got those back eventually. Maybe they didn't want their phone number getting leaked. Who knows? But I do think it's interesting that he is saying, yeah, you know what? They got new phones. Done. So now she continues to ask about the pictures. So you don't have any access to more recent photos of the boys? Is there a reason why Jacqueline hasn't released those photos to the public? I know a lot of people are looking for more recent photos of Orrin and Orson. And he says, I can't speak to what her thought process is, what she's choosing to do or what not to do. Now again, I find that part very interesting. That's something that honestly never even occurred to me of like, yeah, why isn't there recent pictures of the boys coming out? If anyone has any tea on that, I'd love to hear it. Drop it down in the comments. And now she starts to conclude this interview with the following. Lastly, what can community members do to help in the search right now? Should they be searching in Bakersfield, California City? And he says, wherever they think we're going to turn up these kids, I'm not going to turn down. I've said it multiple times, I'm not going to turn down any help. Anything they want to do to help us locate these kids is great, but the majority of the calls that we're getting out are basically to tell us that we're not doing it right. That takes up a lot of our time to even respond to that. I appreciate their interest, that's why I keep giving these interviews. I don't want people to stop thinking about these kids, and I don't want it to become a dead issue. I would like the focus to be on finding the kids. What can you give us that we can tangibly follow up to find these children? To call us up and criticize that we're not doing a good job or that we should be talking to someone else or we should be doing this or we should be doing that is not productive. It takes time because we try to be respectful and kind to anybody that calls. But just remember, the focus should be on finding the kids, not telling us how to do our job. That would be my biggest request. Keep your eyes and ears open. If you find anything that we can follow up on, please call. We will follow up, I promise. We have on each and every one of these tangible leads. But just to call us up and criticize us and ask us, that just takes a lot of time, and it is just taking away the focus from the kids. Okay, so that being said, I agree. I'm glad that he does these interviews and comes out and talks. Yes, there's a degree of frustration because the boys, at the end of the day, the boys aren't home. I mean, that's what it all comes down to. The boys aren't home, and there just doesn't seem to be any real leads. It's seemingly like they just disappeared into thin air, and everybody has a very hard time accepting this reality. I mean, I know I do. It's like, how could this possibly happen? So there's a lot of little interesting tidbits that I felt like he said in this interview. I'm curious to see what y'all have to say about the interview. Drop it like it's hot down in the comments. Let me know. Again, I'm going to put the information down there. If you have any information about the boys that will lead to tangible, something they can follow up on, please contact them. Let them know. I feel like they are open to any and all help like that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for keeping this going. And I will see y'all next time here on the sofa. Until then.